The conference hall stretched across 3 kilometers of crystal and light. Every major civilization in the galaxy had sent their greatest minds to the Grand Assembly on Theorem Station. They gathered here once every cycle to share knowledge, celebrate discoveries, and formally close the books on problems that could not be solved. Today, they were burying the collapse. Dr. Sarah sat in the human delegation section, surrounded by beings that made her feel impossibly small. To her left, the thought weavers floated in their containment spheres, crystalline bodies pulsing with calculations that would take Earth's best computers years to complete. To her right, the collective's avatar sat perfectly still, representing the linked consciousness of 40 billion individuals working as one mind. Behind her, the quantum priests whispered in harmonics that bent probability itself. 300 years. That was how long the galaxy had fought against the collapse. It was a problem in theoretical physics that threatened everything. Faster than light travel, the backbone of galactic civilization was breaking down. Ships were taking longer to jump between systems. The math that had worked was failing, and no one knew why. The thought weavers had tried first. They had mapped every possible solution across 47 dimensions of mathematics. Nothing worked. The collective had devoted 3 billion minds to the problem for a decade. They found nothing but dead ends. The quantum priests had used their probability engines to test solutions that existed in theoretical space-time. Every path led to failure. Now, the galaxy's greatest scientific mind stood at the podium. Executor Prime Ha, a being of pure mathematics who existed as living equations, prepared to make the final declaration. The problem was unsolvable. It was time to move on, to find workarounds, to accept that some questions had no answers. Sarah raised her hand. The gesture was so simple, so childlike, that several species took a moment to understand what she was doing. Humans were new to the galactic community, barely a century past their first contact. They had contributed little to major science. Most considered them enthusiastic but limited. Executor Prime Ha paused. The equations that formed its body rippled with what might have been surprise. The human delegation wishes to speak. Sarah stood. Her voice seemed tiny in the massive hall, but she spoke clearly. We would like to try solving the problem. A sound rolled through the chamber. It took Sarah a moment to realize it was laughter. Not cruel exactly, but the kind of gentle amusement one might give to a child who wanted to help rebuild a collapsed star. Ha's equations flowed into a pattern that humans had learned to recognize as kindness. Doctor, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but the greatest minds in the galaxy have exhausted every possible approach. The thought weavers alone tested 10 to the 47th power potential solutions. Surely you understand the scope of what has already been attempted. Sarah nodded. I do understand, and I know we are not as smart as the thought weavers. We cannot think as fast as the collective. We cannot bend probability like the quantum priests. She paused, and something in her eyes made the laughter die down. But we can do something none of you can do. We can keep trying after everyone else has stopped. The thought weaver's representative spoke, its voice like wind chimes. We have already proven the mathematical impossibility. Continuing to test would be irrational. Yes, Sarah said simply, it would be. The silence that followed was confused. Finally, Ha spoke again. You acknowledge it is irrational, yet you wish to proceed. Humans are very good at being irrational, Sarah said. We spent 10,000 years trying to fly before we figured it out. Every physicist said it was impossible. We did it anyway. We spent centuries trying to cure diseases that killed millions. Everyone said some diseases could never be stopped. We stopped them. We sent people to our moon using computers less powerful than what I carry in my pocket because we decided we wanted to go and we did not care how hard it was. She looked around the chamber. You have all tried your best. You have tried the smart way, the efficient way, the logical way. Now let us try the human way. And what is the human way? Asked the collective's avatar. Sarah smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone about to do something difficult and painful and necessary. We try everything, then we try it all again. Then we try it again with small changes, then we try it backwards, then we try it sideways, then we try combinations no one has thought of. Then we try random things that make no sense, and we do not stop, ever, even when every equation says we should, even when everyone tells us we are wasting time. Even when we fail 1,000,000 times, we try one more time. Executor Prime Ha's equations shimmered. The statistical probability of success through such methods is effectively zero. Then it is not actually zero, Sarah said. 3 institutions approached Sarah after the assembly closed. They were small organizations, barely noticed by the greater scientific community. The institute studied fringe physics that mainstream science ignored. The peripheral collective worked on problems no one else wanted. The foundation for unlikely solutions was considered a joke by serious researchers. They had nothing to lose. The humans had nothing to prove. It was a perfect match. Sarah's team arrived at the research station 6 weeks later. 12 humans, carrying equipment that looked primitive compared to galactic standards. They set up their computers, linked them to the alien systems, and began working. The alien partners watched with curiosity at first. The human method was strange. They did not spend weeks planning the perfect approach. They simply started trying solutions, one after another after another. When something failed, they noted it and moved on. No drama, no despair, just on to the next attempt. Luxor 7, the director of the institute, was a being of pure energy who had existed for 3,000 years. It had never seen anything like the humans. They worked with a rhythm that seemed almost mechanical, yet their approach was anything but. They tried solutions that made no mathematical sense. They combined approaches that contradicted each other. They tested theories that had been proven wrong centuries ago, just to see what would happen. After 6 months, they had tested 1,000,000 variations. Luxor 7 gently suggested this was enough to demonstrate their commitment. Sarah thanked him for his concern and requested more computing power. The galaxy watched, at first with amusement, then with puzzlement, then with something approaching concern. Research teams from other institutions would visit the station, observe the humans for a few days, and leave shaking their heads or their tentacles or their sensory clusters. The humans never seemed discouraged. Every failed test was treated like progress. Dr. James covered 3 walls of his quarters with equations. When Luxor 7 asked if this was normal human behavior, James laughed. Probably not healthy, but I am close to something. I can feel it. Feel it? Luxor 7 was confused. The problem is mathematical. There is nothing to feel. James tapped his chest. Humans feel everything. We feel when we are close to answers. We feel when something is right even if we cannot prove it yet. We feel when we need to keep going. 3 years passed. The number of tested solutions climbed past 10 billion. Other research institutions began using the human project as a teaching example in courses. What made a species continue pursuing a proven impossibility? Why did humans not experience the natural despair that came with endless failure? The answer, researchers concluded, was that humans did not see failure the same way. When the thought weavers hit a dead end, they understood they had reached the limit of what was possible. When humans hit a dead end, they believed they had simply found another way that did not work yet. A betting pool formed among galactic scientists. How long would the humans continue? 5 years? 10? Some bet that humans would literally work on the problem until they died of old age. No one bet on them succeeding. Sarah turned 43 on the research station. Her team threw her a small party in the cafeteria. They ate cake that tasted like cardboard because the food synthesizers had not quite figured out human preferences. They told bad jokes and laughed too loud. Then they went back to work. Year 7 brought a change, not in results but in perception. Young scientists from across the galaxy began requesting to visit the human research station. They came not to study the problem, but to study the humans. They wanted to understand this strange persistence, this refusal to accept reality. A Thought Weaver student named Crystal 7 spent 3 months at the station. When she returned to her home institution, she filed a report that went viral across academic networks. Humans have taught me something we thought we knew, but did not truly understand. Intelligence is not just about finding the right answer quickly. Sometimes intelligence is about being willing to find 1 trillion wrong answers first. The report changed nothing about the collapse, but it changed how some beings thought about problems. A few research teams began adopting what they called the human method. Try more, try longer, try past the point of reason. Year 9 arrived like any other. Sarah was 45 now, with gray streaking through her black hair. She had spent a third of her adult life on this problem. Her family back on Earth sent messages asking when she was coming home. She told them soon. She told them that lie every time. The station ran its simulations continuously now. The number of attempts had grown beyond easy counting. 10 to the 54th power. A number so large it hurt to think about. The Thought Weavers had tested 10 to the 47th. The humans had gone 7 orders of magnitude further into the darkness, searching for light. On day 247 of Year 9, at 2:47 in the morning station time, something changed. Sarah was asleep in her quarters, dreaming about equations that danced like living things. The simulation array did not sleep. It continued testing as it always did, variation after variation after variation. One variation produced a result that was different. Not right, not a solution, just different. The numbers twisted in a way they had never twisted before. The equations bent into a shape that should not exist. The computer flagged it as an anomaly and sent an alert to Sarah's terminal. Sarah woke to the sound of the alert. She stared at her screen for a full minute, not daring to believe. Then she called James. Then she called the rest of the team. Within an hour, every human on the station was awake and working. Luxor 7 arrived to find the human quarters blazing with light and activity. Sarah was standing in front of a holographic display, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her hands moving through the equations like a conductor leading an orchestra. Around her, the other humans worked with an intensity that bordered on frightening. Sarah, Luxor 7 said carefully, "You need to rest." "No time," Sarah said without looking away from her work. "This is it. This is the path." "You have said that before." "This time it is real." Sarah's voice was hoarse. "Look at these numbers. Look at how they flow. This is not another dead end. This is the way through." The next 72 hours would later be studied as an example of human endurance at its most extreme. None of the team slept. They barely ate. They existed in a state that Luxor 7 could only describe as controlled mania. Coffee consumption reached levels that should have been medically dangerous. The humans did not seem to notice. The galaxy's scientific community began receiving updates from the station. At first, the reaction was the usual tired amusement. The humans had found another lead that would go nowhere. But as hours turned into days and the humans did not stop, did not slow down, did not return to their normal routine, interest began to grow. Something was happening. By the end of the first week, Sarah's team had transformed the anomaly into a framework. It was rough and incomplete, but it held together. The equations balanced in ways they had never balanced before. The collapse was no longer a wall. It was a maze, and the humans had found the entrance. Luxor 7 contacted the other partner institutions. They needed more help, more computing power, more resources. The requests went out across the galaxy. Most ignored them, but some did not. A few research teams, inspired by Crystal 7's report or simply curious, offered their support. By the end of the second month, the framework had become a structure. By the end of the third month, the structure had become a solution. It was Doctor who ran the final verification. She sat alone in the simulation chamber at 3 in the morning, too exhausted to feel triumph, too focused to care. She entered the equations into the system. She initialized the test. She watched as the computers processed data that represented 300 years of galactic failure and 9 years of human stubbornness. The simulation completed. The result appeared on her screen. Sarah stared at it for a long time, then she started to cry. The solution was elegant and beautiful and completely insane. It worked by taking a path through mathematical space that no rational species would ever have attempted. It required failing in very specific ways, 10 to the 54th times, just to find the starting point. From there, it required intuitive leaps that made no logical sense but somehow worked anyway. It was a solution that could only have been found by a species too stubborn to understand when they should quit. The announcement went out to the Galactic Research Consortium the next day. At first, there was disbelief. The thought weavers demanded to verify the math themselves. The collective wanted independent confirmation. The quantum priests ran probability checks to ensure this was not some cosmic joke. Every check came back the same. The humans had done it. The collapse was solved. The celebration symposium was held 3 months later, back in the same crystal hall where Sarah had first raised her hand. This time, when she walked to the podium, no one laughed. The greatest minds in the galaxy watched in silence as this small human, who looked tired and old beyond her years, prepared to speak. But it was not Sarah who gave the main address. Luxor 7 had requested that honor. The being of pure energy floated to the center of the hall, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of existence. "We believed we understood intelligence," Luxor 7 began. "We thought it was about efficiency, about finding the optimal path to a solution, about knowing when to stop wasting resources on impossible problems." It paused, and its energy form pulsed with something that might have been emotion. "Humans have taught us that we were wrong. Intelligence is not just about knowing when to stop. Sometimes, intelligence is about refusing to stop even when everything says you should." Luxor 7 turned toward the human delegation. "The solution to the collapse is mathematically beautiful, but the path to that solution is ugly. It is inefficient. It is irrational. It required failing more times than most species can count. It required a stubbornness that borders on madness, and that is precisely why it worked." The being's form brightened. "We asked the humans why they never gave up. Doctor told me something I will never forget. She said that human history is just a long list of things they were told they could not do, followed by them doing those things anyway. They do not have the best minds in the galaxy. They do not have the fastest computers or the longest or the most elegant mathematics, but they will try one more time than anyone else will. And sometimes that is the only thing that matters." The hall erupted in applause. Not the polite acknowledgement that usually followed scientific presentations, but genuine, thunderous appreciation. Species that had never made such sounds before found themselves joining in, creating a noise that shook the crystal walls. Sarah stood with her team, tears running down her face, and felt the weight of 9 years lifting from her shoulders. They had done it. Not because they were not because they had the best resources, but because they had simply refused to stop. The partnership between human researchers and galactic institutions expanded rapidly after that. Within a year, human teams were integrated into projects across known space. They were brought in specifically for problems that had been declared unsolvable. They became known throughout the galaxy by a single name: the Endurance. They were the ones you called when you had exhausted every logical option. They were the ones who would keep going after everyone else had given up. They were the ones who understood that in an infinite universe, impossible just meant you had not tried enough times yet. Sarah returned to Earth 5 years after the solution was confirmed. She was 50 years old, famous across the galaxy, and utterly exhausted. She took a teaching position at the Interstellar Academy and spent her days training the next generation of human researchers. On her first day of class, a student raised their hand and asked her what made humans special. What gave them the ability to solve problems that defeated species far older and wiser? Sarah thought about that for a long time. Then she smiled, and it was the same smile she had given the Galactic Research Consortium so many years ago. The smile of someone about to do something difficult and necessary and true. "We are not special," she said. "We are not smarter than the thought weavers. We are not faster than the collective. We are not more advanced than the quantum priests, but we have something they do not have, something that cannot be programmed or calculated or optimized." She wrote 2 words on the board behind her: "Never quit." "Every human carries this in their DNA," she continued. "Our ancestors climbed down from trees and decided to walk across continents. They had no fur to keep them warm, no claws to hunt with, no speed to escape predators. Logic said they should have died. They did not die. They made fire instead. They made tools. They made civilization. They did it by being too stubborn to accept what nature told them they were." Sarah looked at her students, seeing in them the same fire that had kept her going through 9 years of failure. The galaxy is full of species that are better than us at almost everything. But there is one thing humans do better than anyone else in the universe. We fail. We fail 1,000,000 times, and then we get up and try again. That is our gift. That is our strength. That is why the galaxy needs us. She paused at the door before leaving. The collapse was just the beginning. There are 1,000 more impossible problems waiting out there. Problems that will break the hearts and minds of every species that tries to solve them. And when those species give up, when they declare those problems unsolvable and move on with their lives, we will still be there, trying one more time, because that is what humans do. The legacy of the collapse echoed through generations. It became more than a solution to a physics problem. It became a philosophy. Universities across the galaxy taught courses on human persistence. The equation that saved faster-than-light travel was officially named the solution, but it was informally known by another name: the stubborn path. Young beings from 100 species came to Earth to study at human institutions, not because human technology was the best, but because they wanted to learn how to keep going when everything said to stop. They wanted to understand how a species that was younger, weaker, and less intelligent than most others had become the ones the galaxy called when hope was lost. The answer was always the same. Humans had learned, over millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of civilization, that survival belonged not to the strongest or the fastest. Survival belonged to the ones who refused to die, who got knocked down and stood back up, who failed and tried again, who heard the word impossible and treated it as a challenge rather than a limit. Other species optimized for efficiency. Humans optimized for endurance. Other species knew when to quit. Humans had never learned that lesson, and in a universe full of impossible problems, that made all the difference. The Galactic Research Consortium created a new award after the collapse. It was called the Persistence Prize, and it was given not to the researcher who found the best solution, but to the one who kept trying the longest. The first recipient was Dr. Sarah. The trophy sat in her office until the day she died, a simple piece of crystal etched with words that had become humanity's motto: "We try one more time." Decades passed. Sarah's students became researchers themselves, spreading out across the galaxy, carrying with them the human method. Try more, try longer, try past the point where anyone else would stop. They solved problems that had waited centuries for answers. They opened new fields of research. They changed the galaxy not through superior intelligence, but through superior refusal to accept defeat. And when other species asked them how they did it, how they found the strength to continue when all logic said to stop, the answer was always the same. "We are human," they would say. "We never give up." Those 4 words became humanity's reputation, their brand, their promise. When a human team took on a problem, the galaxy knew that the problem would either be solved or the humans would die trying. There was no middle ground, no giving up, no acceptance of defeat. It made humans respected. It made them valued. It made them feared in a way that had nothing to do with weapons or threats, because there was something terrifying about a species that did not know how to quit, something unsettling about beings who would throw themselves at a problem for decades, for centuries if necessary, until either the problem broke or they did. The galaxy learned to be grateful that humans were generally peaceful and well-meaning. Because a species with that level of persistence, turned toward conquest or destruction, would be unstoppable not because they were strong, but because they would never stop coming. But humans did not turn toward conquest. They turned toward problems, toward mysteries, toward the impossible questions that kept civilizations awake at night, and they solved them one stubborn attempt at a time. Sarah died at the age of 97, surrounded by family and former students. Her last words were to a young researcher who had come to ask her advice about a problem that seemed impossible to solve. "How long should I keep trying?" the young woman asked. Sarah smiled. It was the same smile she had carried her entire life, the smile of someone who had done something impossible simply by refusing to believe it could not be done. "One more time than everyone else," Sarah whispered. "Always one more time." And so the legacy continued. Human researchers spread across the galaxy, carrying with them the stubborn fire that had saved faster-than-light travel and would go on to save 1,000 other things. They were not the species. They were not the fastest or the strongest or the most advanced, but they were the ones who never gave up. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. Had studied 347 different species across the galaxy. He knew how civilizations worked. He understood the patterns of progress, the careful steps that all intelligent life took from fire to fusion, from wheels to warp drives. Everything followed rules. Everything made sense, until he arrived at Earth. The Cosmic Innovation Commission had sent him to solve a mystery. Humans had achieved in 200 years what should have taken them 2,000. They had discovered things that older, wiser species had spent millions of years searching for. The numbers did not lie, but they also did not make sense. Suspected fraud. Perhaps humans were stealing technology. Perhaps they had found ancient alien artifacts. Perhaps they were simply very good at lying about their achievements. His ship settled into orbit above the blue and white planet, and he began his observations. What he saw made him more confused than ever. Earth was not one world. It was hundreds of worlds crammed into one small sphere. The humans had divided themselves into nearly 200 separate nations, each with its own language, its own laws, its own way of thinking. Some nations hated each other. Some had fought terrible wars. Some refused to even speak to their neighbors. For research and discovery, this should have been a disaster. The OK people's own species had unified their planet before they even invented electricity. One language, one government, one systematic approach to everything. That was the right way. That was the efficient way. Every species in the commission had done the same thing. Unity brought strength. Division brought chaos. But humans loved their chaos, watched them and shook his head in disbelief. He saw scientists in Moscow working on quantum problems, while scientists in Mumbai worked on the same problems using completely different methods. He saw researchers in Mexico City and Melbourne arguing through video calls, their faces red with anger as they shouted about the right way to measure gravitational waves. He saw teams from Kenya, Korea, and Canada all trying to solve the same medical puzzle, each group refusing to admit that any other group might be correct. This was insanity. This was waste. This was everything that intelligent civilization should avoid. Began writing his report immediately. He would expose humanity's inefficiency. He would show the commission that these humans were not special at all. They were just lucky, and their luck would run out soon. He chose to focus on one specific project. 6 human research centers were working together to build a new kind of telescope that could see through dimensions that other species did not even know existed. The team included scientists from Japan, Brazil, South Africa, Norway, India, and Australia. They could barely communicate. Their meetings were a mess of translators and misunderstandings. They argued about everything from basic mathematics to what color the equipment should be painted. Watched them for 3 months, documenting every mistake, every argument, every inefficiency. His report would be devastating. The commission would finally understand that humans were not advanced at all. They were children playing with tools they did not understand. Then something changed. A young woman in Australia, barely old enough to have finished her education, proposed a new idea during one of their video meetings. She suggested that they were looking at their data backwards. She said that what they thought was noise in their measurements was actually the signal they were searching for. The other scientists immediately began shouting at her. The man from Japan said she was wrong. The woman from India said she was ignoring basic principles. The team from Brazil laughed at her. Nodded to himself. This was exactly what he expected. The young researcher would be crushed by the hierarchy, her idea would be buried, and the project would continue limping forward with its flawed approach. This was what happened when you did not have proper systems in place. But the humans did not follow the script that had written for them. The Japanese scientists stopped shouting and started calculating. The Indian researcher pulled up the data and began running new tests. The Brazilian team stopped laughing and started building a simulation. Within hours, scientists in Norway were checking the mathematics. Within days, the South African facility was rebuilding their equipment to test the new approach. Within 2 weeks, every single team had dropped their original plans and were working together on the Australian woman's idea. They did not ask for permission. They did not wait for approval from committees or councils. They did not spend years reviewing and debating and making sure everyone agreed. They just started working. The scientist in Tokyo would finish his calculations and send them to Mumbai. The researcher in Mumbai would finish her analysis and send it too. The team in would finish their simulations and send them to Cape Town. Around and around the planet, following the sun, the work never stopped. Watched in amazement. He had never seen anything like it. When the OK wanted to test a new idea, it took 5 years just to get approval from the Central Research Committee. Then it took another 3 years to assign the proper teams. Then it took another 2 years to review the methodology. By the time any actual work began, a decade had passed. These humans had gone from argument to answer in 11 days. The young woman from Australia had been right. They found what they were looking for. They could now see things that no other species in the galaxy could see. And they had done it by fighting with each other, by refusing to accept any single answer as correct until they had tested everything, by letting anyone speak up no matter how young or inexperienced they were. Deleted his report. He started again. This time, he was not looking for inefficiency. He was looking for the pattern underneath the chaos. He was looking for the reason why division made humans stronger instead of weaker. He was looking for the thing that every other species in the galaxy had missed. He found it in the arguments. He found it in the translation errors that forced humans to explain their ideas 3 different ways until everyone understood. He found it in the different schools and different traditions and different ways of thinking that humans brought to every problem. He found it in the borders and barriers that forced humans to build bridges. The OK had one way of thinking about physics. Humans had hundreds. The OK had one approach to mathematics. Humans had dozens. The OK had one philosophy of science. Humans fought wars over which philosophy was correct. And in that fighting, in that endless debate, in that refusal to ever simply accept what they were told, humans had built something that no unified species could match. They had built an engine of innovation that ran on disagreement. Expanded his study. He looked at human history and found the same pattern everywhere. A Chinese scientist would spend years developing an idea. A German scientist would prove that idea wrong. An American scientist would take the pieces of both ideas and build something new. An Egyptian scientist would look at that new thing and ask a question nobody else had thought to ask. A Chilean scientist would answer that question in a way that opened 10 new questions. Around and around the world, through languages and cultures and nations that often hated each other, human knowledge grew like a fire that fed on oxygen. The other species in the galaxy had optimized themselves into stagnation. They had made everything efficient and organized and perfect. They had eliminated waste and chaos and disagreement. They had created peaceful, stable civilizations where everyone agreed on the right way to do things. And because everyone agreed, nobody ever thought to ask if there might be a different way, a better way, a faster way. Humans never agreed on anything, and that was their power. Found example after example. A disease that had killed millions of OK was cured by humans in 7 years. The cure came from combining traditional medicine from Nigeria with genetic research from China with pharmaceutical techniques from Switzerland. None of those three groups would have found the answer alone. Together, arguing and fighting and testing each other's ideas, they found it quickly. A new form of energy that had taken the harmonic collective 8,000 years to discover was found by humans in 3 decades. The discovery came from a collaboration between Korea and Argentina, 2 nations on opposite sides of their planet that had never interacted before. They approached the same problem from such different angles that, when they finally compared notes, the solution was obvious. A mathematical proof that had frustrated galactic scholars for 15,000 years was solved by a human teenager in Pakistan working with a retired professor in Iceland. They had met on something humans called the Internet, a chaotic mess of information and arguments and ideas that somehow let any human talk to any other human, anywhere on their planet at any time. The OK would never build such a thing. It would be far too disorganized, far too inefficient, far too likely to spread wrong information alongside correct information. But humans loved it. They loved the chaos. They loved the arguments. They loved being able to find someone on the other side of their planet who disagreed with them, and then spending hours fighting about who was right. And in those fights, they learned things that no single group or nation or culture could ever have discovered alone. His new report grew longer every day. He documented how human universities competed with each other, driving researchers to find answers before their rivals did. He documented how human corporations raced to build better technology, each one trying to prove they were smarter than the others. He documented how human nations watched each other constantly, terrified of falling behind, desperate to show that their way of doing things was the best way. It was not cooperation. It was competition. Humans were not working together because they liked each other or because they shared some grand vision of unity. They were working together because they were terrified of being left behind. Every human scientist knew that somewhere on their planet, another scientist was working on the same problem, trying to find the answer first. Every human nation knew that if they did not push forward, if they did not innovate and adapt and improve, some other nation would surpass them. Fear and pride and competition. These were the fuels that powered humanity's engine, not harmony, not consensus, not the careful, methodical progress that every other species valued. Humans were driven by the constant need to prove themselves, to show that they were better than their neighbors, to win the endless race that had no finish line. And it worked. It worked better than anything had ever seen. It worked so well that he started to feel afraid, not for himself, for the rest of the galaxy. Because if humans could achieve so much while divided, what would they achieve when they finally learned to work together? What would they become when they pointed all of that competitive energy outward instead of at each other? Finished his report after 6 months of study. He included hundreds of examples. He included careful analysis of human psychology, human culture, human history. He included predictions about humanity's future that made his hands shake as he typed them. Then he sent the report to the Cosmic Innovation Commission and waited for their response. The response came quickly. The Central Council demanded a full presentation. They did not believe his findings. They wanted proof. They wanted evidence. They wanted to explain how everything they knew about civilization could be so completely wrong. Stood before the council in their great chamber on the commission's home station. Representatives from 40 different species watched him with skeptical eyes. He showed them videos of humans arguing. He showed them data on human progress. He showed them the mathematics that proved his conclusions. And slowly, the skepticism turned to shock. The OK counselor spoke first. Her voice was shaking. She asked the question that everyone was thinking. Should other species try to copy the human approach? Should they deliberately introduce chaos into their research systems? Should they break apart their unified governments and create borders and divisions? Shook his head. He explained that you could not engineer what humans had. It was not a system that could be. It was the result of humanity's unique history, their short that made them desperate to achieve things quickly, their tribal instincts that made them divide into groups, their aggressive nature that made them compete constantly. Other species had evolved differently. Other species valued different things. They could learn from humanity, but they could not become human. The representative from the Harmonic Collective asked a different question. She wanted to know if humanity was dangerous. If humans could achieve so much through division and competition, what would they do to other species? Would they conquer? Would they dominate? Would they treat the galaxy the same way they treated each other? Had thought about this question for many nights. He did not have a good answer. Humans could be generous and kind. He had seen them send aid to other nations even when those nations were their enemies. He had seen them collaborate across borders to solve problems that hurt all of humanity. But he had also seen them wage terrible wars. He had seen them destroy each other over resources and territory and ideology. He had seen cruelty and violence that shocked him deeply. Humans contain both angels and demons, sometimes in the same person, sometimes in the same moment. They were capable of extraordinary compassion and extraordinary brutality. They could cure a disease that saved millions and build a weapon that killed millions. They could write poetry about love and peace while bombing each other's cities. They were contradictions wrapped in flesh, impossible to predict, impossible to control. But one thing was certain. Humanity was rising, fast. In another century, maybe less, they would have technology that matched the oldest species in the galaxy. In 2 centuries, they might surpass everyone. And when that happened, when humans spread out into the stars with their chaos and competition and endless drive to prove themselves, the galaxy would change forever. The council debated for hours. Some wanted to contain humanity, to limit their growth, to prevent them from becoming a threat. Others argued that such action would only make things worse. Humans did not respond well to being told what to do. Trying to stop them would just make them try harder. In the end, the council made a simple decision. They would publish a report. They would share it with every species in the commission. They would let everyone know what was coming. And they would hope that when humanity finally reached the stars, they would remember that the galaxy had treated them fairly. Returned to Earth one final time. He watched the scientists he had studied for so many months. They were arguing again, this time about whether consciousness could be transferred through quantum connections. They were split across dozens of different theories. They were fighting and debating and testing and failing and trying again. They had no idea that the galaxy was watching them. They had no idea that they had changed everything. He sent one final message to the commission. It was not part of his official report. It was just a personal observation, something he needed to say even though nobody had asked for it. He wrote about watching the sunrise over Earth, seeing the lights of human cities spread across the continents, knowing that in each of those cities millions of humans were waking up to compete and argue and push forward. He wrote about the feeling in his chest when he realized that humanity was not an anomaly or an accident. They were a preview. They were showing the galaxy what was possible when you refused to accept that the old ways were the only ways. He wrote about hope and fear, about the future that was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. And he wrote about the last thing he had learned during his time studying humans, the thing that scared him most of all. Humans were not special because they were divided. Every young species was divided. Humans were special because they had learned to make their divisions into strengths. They had taken borders and turned them into bridges. They had taken arguments and turned them into answers. They had taken the chaos that should have destroyed them and used it to build something beautiful and terrible and utterly unstoppable. And they had done it all without ever realizing how extraordinary they were. They thought this was normal. They thought every species fought and competed and argued their way to the stars. They had no idea that everyone else had taken the easy path, the safe path, the slow path. Ended his message with a prediction. Within 50 years, the galaxy would have to make room for a new power. Within 100 years, that new power would be impossible to ignore. And within 200 years, when humans finally understood their own strength, when they finally realized that their chaos was actually their greatest gift, they would reshape everything. The age of careful, methodical progress was ending. The age of humanity was beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same. He left Earth's orbit and began the long journey home. Behind him, the blue and white planet continued spinning. On its surface, billions of humans continued fighting and arguing and competing and collaborating and pushing forward into a future that they were building one disagreement at a time. They did not know that they were changing the galaxy. They did not know that they were feared and admired and studied by civilizations older than their entire history. They just knew that somewhere, someone else was working on the same problem they were working on. Someone else was trying to find the answer first. Someone else was trying to prove that their way was better. And that thought, that simple competitive drive, was enough to keep them moving forward forever. That was humanity. That was their power. That was why the galaxy would remember the day that a divided, chaotic, impossible species called humans learned to reach for the stars. Not because they worked together, but because they never stopped competing to see who could reach highest. It was everything.